This is Hannibal here from the Hannibal TV.com. It's not a wrestling podcast tonight, not a UFO podcast either, but it falls into kind of a little bit in that domain as far as people that are interested in ETs might be interested in this subject. Master hypnotist Jesse Beltran, who also dabbles in a lot of other stuff and is going to talk to us about a number of subjects tonight, including Havana Syndrome, which I don't even know what that is. But how are you doing today, sir?
Doing well, Devon. Thank you, and a pleasure to be on your show. Good.
I understand you're a bit familiar with wrestling.
Well, actually, Mike Grady, he's the big wrestling fan, and he
Okay.
follows you. So he's basically my manager and schedules all of these interviews. And he's been doing too good of a job. 2 and 3 interviews a day gets a little hectic, but I'm glad we can squeeze this in today.
So maybe before we get into what you want to talk about, which is pretty interesting, having to do with implants that have been medically found in people, what is a master hypnotist, which is what you are?
Okay, so a master hypnotist. I've been practicing hypnosis since the early 2000, and I decided to become a certified master hypnotist with a diploma in hypnotherapy in 2014. And basically, what we do is we work with individuals who have certain goal agendas, whether it's a phobia that they want to work on, whether it's PTSD, which I specialize in, uh, help with pain control and managing cancer, um, past life regressions. There's a lot that can be done pretty quickly and effectively. And basically, what Master Hypnotist does is they are experts in uh, assessing suggestibility. And what that allows us to do is bypass the critical mind, everything that we've learned from childhood and all our biases that we've been programmed or indoctrinated with from childhood to adulthood, and helps us put that aside for just a moment and talk directly to the subconscious, because the subconscious mind is really the part of you that controls everything. It controls your heartbeat, your breathing, your protective responses, and it's the part of you that you can trust 100% of the time. The interesting thing about the subconscious mind is it really doesn't have these critical filters. And what it does, it it allows you to, in essence, and I'll use this analogy. Dr. Richard Bandler, who was the co-creator of neurolinguistic programming, always used this analogy. Human beings have never been taught how to deprogram a neuron in our brains that it has had bad programming. And depending on what the client goal is, we will re-emphasize their goals and use it in a positive affirmation way to reprogram that neuron with good information. And then, in essence, you have an output that allows the person to go through life in a regular basis, not with, for example, in PTSD, uh, and help them overcome those triggers that cause the physiological effects that you get with PTSD. And it subsides, smoking sensation, eating habits. There's a plethora of things that people aren't really familiar with that hypnotherapy can help you with. Most people are familiar with what they see in Hollywood programming or in your local county fair where there's a hypnotist is doing stage hypnosis, which is a totally different than what a hypnotherapist does.
So you use hypnotherapy combined with like affirmations, audio that people would listen to maybe before they go to bed or as they're falling asleep to
Yeah,
change their programming.
correct. And we customize it on an individual basis because everyone's different. No two people have the same agenda or same goals. They don't have the same upbringing. They don't have the same demographics that they have been exposed to. So it's very customized to the individual.
So to get into your side projects here and what you're here to talk about, first of all, what is Havana syndrome for someone like me that's heard about it in movies or maybe heard people like you mention it on YouTube here and there, but aren't really
Okay.
that familiar with it?
Okay. So a little bit about my background. I'm a retired firefighter paramedic from the city of Sacramento. As you just heard, I'm a certified master hypnotherapist with a diploma in hypnotherapy. Uh, in over the last 2 decades, I was also the president of an organization called the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies. And how that came about is I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Hall in Texas, who was the author of two books. The first book was A New Breed Satellite Terrorism in America. And the second is Guinea Pigs Technologies of Control. Um, and and I'll explain further about that meeting. But to answer your question, it ties directly into what uh, the Department of Homeland Security held a hearing on in March of this year here in the United States. And the Havana Syndrome was, according to their testimony, they said it started in 2016 at the United States Embassy in Havana, Cuba. And what our diplomats were complaining about is having this acute onset of these strange sounds that they were hearing, followed by severe migraines, headache, brain fog, fatigue, and dizziness, nausea, vertigo, and electrical shocks to the extremities. And initially, the United States did not support them. They tried to write it off as some type of mental hysteria phenomenon that was happening. They didn't take it seriously until the diplomats from Canada started complaining about the same symptoms. And the Canadian government was a little bit more supportive. They believed their diplomats and they supported them with like work comp and medical treatment and aid. And what they were finding is there was evidence under MRIs of brain concussions, brain trauma, actual changes in the brain. And the Department of Homeland Security held the hearing in March, like I explained, and there was a testimony given by one of the witnesses there, and it was a retired Lieutenant um, Greg Edgren, and he helped federal employees who were injured in their tenure in performing their duties. Now, he expressed concern because he said that this was taking out our elite uh, federal employees, not only our diplomats, but it was also affecting our CIA agents, our FBI agents, and some of the federal employees' family members. And in essence, that is what Havana Syndrome is. The new acronym that they're utilizing today is called Anomalous Health Incidents, AHIs. Now, getting back to Dr. John Hall, when I met him in Texas, we got on this topic, but the Havana Syndrome was not a term that was known back then, or AHIs. And what he was explaining to me is that there were individuals seeking him out and complaining of these exact same symptoms. And they believed that they were being hit with some type of radio frequency. And so, what John Hall was doing is he was doing what was called a radio frequency scan, and he would do this on occasion for them. And so, I had asked him, I said, well, why aren't we doing anything about this? And he says, because if when they go to traditional medicine, as soon as you say you're hearing strange sounds, they automatically diagnose you with a mental disorder like schizophrenia or psychosis, and they re victimize you again by giving you drugs or giving you that label. And once you get labeled with a mental disorder, you pretty much become the bottom of society. Um, you're given no credibility whatsoever. And so what I decided to do was take these subjective complaints and see if there was a way that we can see if there was something legitimate there. Can we take this and turn it into objective data? So that's how I created the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies, ISAACT for short, and that's how I will say it throughout this podcast. Now, we had our first meeting in Sacramento, California, and to my surprise, 100 people showed up. And what was interesting is they all complained of the exact same symptoms with very little deviation. And then we held a second meeting in Davis, California, and 300 people showed up. So then we started to say, well, there's something seriously wrong here. Something is going on. And what the data was showing initially is it was mainly affecting Caucasians, Caucasian women in their 40s or greater who were highly educated, recently single, widowed, or divorced. Then it went to Caucasian males, then African American females, African American males, then Asians and the same Asian females, Asian males, and then it dwindled down from there in ethnicity. And so we continued to do this throughout the United States. We went to the Midwest, pretty much the same.
Oh, I think we
Ish.
lost your sound for a second.
Did we? Can you hear me?
Did we touch something?
Nope, haven't touched anything.
Hmm.
Uh-oh.
Let me try taking you out and putting you back in. Maybe
That
try
better?
taking yourself out and putting yourself back in.
Okay, let's check.
See if that makes any difference. Anyways, we will be asking fan questions on this as well. This is a unique topic. I'm always willing to hear someone out on their theories. He also has some evidence that he is going to show us. And he's back now. He has some evidence he's going to show us as well later.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Strange.
Very strange.
I wonder if I can hear you on that screen. No.
Can you hear me? Testing.
Very.
1, 2,
Oh, I
3.
can hear you. Now I can hear you.
You can hear me now?
You're back.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That was very strange. First time that's happened. Anyhow, where
Someone
was
doesn't
I?
want your story out. Somebody doesn't
Well,
want your story out.
it's a little too late. It's actually picking up steam, and so we're glad because that was the purpose of this is to educate the general population. So I think I left off that we were in the Midwest and started. We had the same results as we did on the Pacific Coast here in the United States. Then it changed a little bit when we got into Chicago area, where there was a little flip. African Americans were the African American women became the top targets, then the men, then Caucasian women, then Caucasian men, Asians, and it dwindled down there. And that stayed consistent all the way to the East Coast with one anomaly. The anomaly was in Virginia. I was invited over to speak to some folks there, about 100 or so, and they were all military subcontractors, which I thought was very interesting. And they also had all the same complaints, consistent with the domestic Havana Syndrome. And the reason that is where I started testing for suggestibility. And with that group of military subcontractors, I asked everyone, I go, raise your hand if you think you're highly suggestible. And no one raised their hand, and I wasn't surprised. Then I asked, well, raise your hand if you're not suggestible. And almost everyone raised their hand except with a couple of people. So I took the most intimidating person in the room and asked him to come to the center of the room so we can just have a general conversation like you and I are speaking now. And he was about 6'6", a very fit, good looking gentleman. He was African American. And we were talking. He had his hands together. And by the time we were done talking, I said, do me a favor. Can you try pulling your hands apart? It was like this. And he tried with all his might. And he started to sweat. And you can see anxiety building up because he didn't know what was happening. And everyone in the room was really in awe and caught a gasp and trying to figure out what just happened. And what we look as hypnotists is we want to make sure there's no abreaction. Abreaction is it's could turn into an unpleasant situation. So what I did is immediately put him to sleep. Okay, and then we started using positive affirmations. Now that you understand that you may be highly suggestible, that's the beginning of protecting yourself. And then I followed up with, and then we brought him back, and then I followed up with him, and we worked on this particular topic for a little bit, and then started to become have normal existences within his life and his job and relationships. And 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 this is the issue that affects people. What usually happens is uh, people who are highly suggestible, not just victims of Havana syndrome, just in general, and about a third of the statistics show anywhere from 15 to 30% of the population have this um, suggestibility. And what what happens is that usually they have issues not only in interpersonal relationships, but at work. And they tend to live a life that's like a roller coaster because there's no consistency because you're always in different states and you're always acting on these suggestions unknowingly. So the reason I bring this up is there was a shooting in a Navy yard on the East Coast, and it was done by a gentleman by the name of Aaron Alexis. Now, Aaron Alexis contacted me prior to him doing these atrocities, and I had no indication that he was going to do this. But he was having these exact same complaints, no different, no deviation from anywhere else that we've done in the United States. And what happens is initially is when someone is exposed to this, you're in fight or flight mode. And um, there's another case by the name of Myron May, who was an attorney in Florida, who also was complaining of these exact same symptoms. And he ended up killing three people at the university there who he believed were responsible for doing this to him. Where are we at with this? So we were doing these RF scans all throughout the United States. And what we were finding is people were coming up positive for some reason around their person for an RF emission in very focal points on the human body. And the interesting thing is that we believe initially that back in 2009, 2010, that this was the experimental phase. And then there was a subset of whistleblowers that we believe, or they believe, is why they were entered into this program. And then there were a small subset where they've offended or angered someone in position of power, and then they became victims to this. What has happened though is because the Department of Homeland Security states that they only have documentation and confirm that this is only happening to federal employees, but they said it was happening to federal employees and their family members. And I think they forgot to think about that. Their family members are civilians because they say they can only give testimony that it's only happening to federal employees, but I can give testimony that this is happening to civilians here on the homeland. This has also taken me through to Europe. I've had government agencies ask me to come visit them. And so I can test them and some of their employees in embassies, including bring victims that I thought for sure were being victimized in this way, and that there was some underlying reason why this was happening. So they took me to an undisclosed location where I had to sign an NDA and put me in what is called an allow me to use an anechoic chamber. And an anechoic chamber is this very robust Faraday cage. And what it does is it blocks out frequencies to in very large spectrums. So they don't enter the room environment. And what we were doing, we used control groups of people who weren't victims. And we were testing them within the environment and we got no frequency indications. But those who were complaining of the symptoms, were coming up positive for frequency emissions within the anechoic chamber. Now, the Department of Homeland Security says that this is a directed energy weapon. Um, they're re- they're being targeted with some type of signal.
What's
And
an
I've always
anechoic an
anechoic chamber. It's
yeah.
a it's a it's a it's an environment where it's a very robust environment that blocks out frequencies from entering the room. So it's a controlled atmosphere with these not allowing these frequencies to come in. Why is that important? Because our suspicion is that the frequency emissions were coming from their person, and the only way you can really dial in on that is to have an environment where the frequencies aren't allowed to come into that environment. So that's what this does. And what I can show your audience is what we're pulling out of people today. This is uh, one of my earliest clients who came to us, and this is I'm redacting the lab and the physician names because we want to make sure that they continue to help people who come to them and do this, and we don't want them bombarded. But this is 3 specimens that they they remove from this woman. And the crazy thing is these things are nano size, and this is what they look like. You can see the nanowires, the bio, and another interesting is our bodies do not reject them, and our bodies will actually engulf these implants. Okay. And this is how what we strongly believe is how these victims are receiving the signal, because when they go into large groups, and we know this frequency is being emitted in the general atmosphere, then why isn't everyone having the same symptoms, hearing the strange sound um, that everyone is complaining about, particularly the best of our best in our government? Now, this is where we're at today. These things are so small that they're not going to appear on a radiographic image. You have to use technology in order to see them. Um, in our early days, this is what they looked like. Uh, this is one case where this is a rice type, Verichip type implant. You can see there in an MRI on this particular patient. And this was actually done bilaterally. He had it on both sides. There's a case down in Southern California, um, and this is Dave Larson case. He was a politician, and he had 10 of these devices pulled out of his body. Notice how small they are. Now, this was a decade ago. The implants that I just showed your audience are now nano size. You need a very high powered microscope in order to see them. But notice how the lettering on a penny, they're literally that size. And of various type of implants that were pulled out of uh, Mr. Larson. Now he sued and he lost. And the reason he lost was because he inadvertently participated in an experiment, and they did not give him full disclosure. And this is part of our fight. If you're going to be doing something like this to someone and asking them to participate in an experiment, it should be mandatory that they're giving full disclosure about what is going to be done to them. And had Dave Larson been aware of what they were going to do to him, he would never have allowed this to happen. So this is an issue.
What was the experiment that he agreed to? What did he expect to happen to him?
I'm not sure what the ailment was that he was going to the doctors for, but what we can tell you is what these devices do. These were all biometric sensors, and what they were trying to do. This was a medical company. And what they were doing is they were working with transmission towers in order to get biometric data back and forth. And that's what their experiment was about.
And for a high school student like me, what is biometric data? To dumb it down a
Biometric
bit.
data is basically your heart rate, for example. Um, it would transmit what heart rhythm you were in, what rate your heartbeat was in, so forth. Your respiratory rate, your blood sugar levels, blood pressure. All these things could be remotely accessed. And that's what biometrics do.
Someone on here is asking, does this have anything to do with the vaccines?
We'll get into this. As I was
If it
explaining,
does, I'm in big trouble.
huh?
If it does, I'm in
well,
big trouble.
well, unfortunately, this is a serious issue, and this is why we're out there talking to the general population. Now, remember in our study, the majority of people during the 2009, 2010, as we were gathering this data, we strongly believe with the experimental phase. Now they're in it full fledged. But we can say this when we superimpose all the victims over each other, they were very consistent in the areas that they were lighting up in. Okay. Then we had subsections. We had people who were in the military where you can superimpose over each other. They were slightly different, but they were all consistent with each other. Then you had people who were incarcerated, who we can superimpose over each other. And this is, and you can see that that was very consistent. I'm about to show your audience a document that's very disturbing that I was given recently. And let me see.
So that guy that sued, his implants were removed, right? He's clean now.
Not all of them, no. And I'm not sure why he didn't get all of them removed. I have a feeling that once he was losing that case, because it's very expensive to get these done, the surgeries on these. It's
Is
not
that case
something
public? If someone wants to look it up, what would it be under?
you would just scroll the Larson report, and I have it in the directory for you, Devin. Um, Larson, the Larson report. It's right here. And so everything that was taken out of him, all the studies, toxicology reports, what these implants look like, is all in that report. That's just a small sample. Like I said, there was many of them that were taken out of him. And you can see the geographical area. This was down in Southern California that this was being done. These are the repeaters and transmission towers that were monitoring him. So I was talking about, this is pretty scary. Uh, this was a lawsuit by Dawn DeVore. She was a nurse in the Department of Corrections. She became a whistleblower and also became a victim of this. What was interesting about this case, she intercepted a classified interfacility document. And here is Exhibit 2. This is the document. It's the Connection and Security Division of IBM, and it's confidential and limited distribution, level 9 communication. This is about a 2020 neural chip implant. And it says the control of crime will be paramount in concerning the 21st century. We must be ready with our security products when the demand for them becomes popular. Our research and development division has been in contact with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the California Department of Corrections, the Texas Department of Public Safety, Massachusetts Department of Corrections, bottom line. So what they were doing is they were implanting prisoners without their consent. They were drugging them. And here it says, in California, several prisoners were identified as members of the security threat group. They wanted to make sure that everyone knew they were doing this to protect us. They were brought to the health services at Pelican Bay and tranquilized with advanced sedatives developed by our Cambridge, Massachusetts laboratories. The implant procedure takes 60 to 90 minutes, depending upon the experience of the technician. And they're working on trying to cut that time down by as much as 60%. The results of implants on 8 prisoners yielded the following results. Implants served as surveillance monitoring devices for the group. Implants disabled 2 subjects during an assault on correctional staff. Universal side effects in all 8 subjects revealed that when implant was set to 116 megahertz frequency, subjects became lethargic and slept on average 18 to 22 hours a day. Goes on to talk about how they weren't exercising while they were under this frequency. Each subject was monitored for aggressive activity during the test period, and findings are very conclusive. Um, that 8 test subjects exhibited no aggression, so they were able to manipulate their behaviors and take away their aggression. Each subject experienced only minor bleeding from the nose, ears, and 48 hours after the implant due to initial adjustments. And my point here is this has been going on for a long time, and someone is brazen enough to believe that there's nothing that we can do about it. Where are we going with this?
So that's leaked. That's a leaked document, you're saying,
That is a leaked document. And like
from
I said, I've
an
given you
employee of that prison?
that is correct. So, uh, Larson case,
Did
Bob Boyce
anything
case.
come of that case?
Excuse me?
Did anything come of that case?
Well, that case has been temporarily dismissed with the option of her to come back and sue. She represented herself in pro se. There was attorney mishap that, my understanding, did not file appropriate paperwork in time, and so that's what the dismissal was. But the judge allowed her to come back after she's prepared to go ahead and continue with the lawsuit. But the important part of that is that we were able to obtain that document that was leaked. Here is another case. This is a Bob Boyce case. What we're looking at is a cancerous tumor. And if you look at what's in these tweezers, there's that microchip. This is an older type microchip. Nowadays, as I showed you in the beginning, they're nano size, so you need a high powered microscope after they've been removed in order to identify them. But I spoke to Bob, and Bob had said, Jess, I had terminal cancer. I was just open that I was going to die from this. And he said he was in a Faraday cage. The Faraday cage is a smaller version of the anechoic chamber that I spoke about earlier. And he was testing, he was an inventor of a high efficiency engine, and he was testing for radio frequency leakage from these devices that he was creating. And his scanner, which is what we use in a preliminary scan, the wand brushed over his shoulder and it pinged, uh, full pinged, 5 bars. And he thought that was odd, so he went and got an X-ray, and they found a microchip surrounded by the cancerous tumor. They removed it. Pathology took it. His cancer went into remission. And I asked him about, well, what did you find out about the microchip? And he says it disappeared. So he said a few months later, his cancer came back very aggressively. So he went back into the Faraday cage, rescanned his body. They found another microchip. This time they used a chain of custody. And when they traced the serial number back, the microchip went back to an NSA database. And interesting enough, um, Bob says he knows when this happened to him. His business partner brought him a Mountain Dew. Bob loved Mountain Dew. And he drank the Mountain Dew and he woke up in his office still 3 days later. And his business partner was a former NSA employee. He was afraid that Bob was going to be selling this invention to the Japanese. And this is why Bob believed that he was implanted in this particular case. Are you still there? Oh, I lost you.
Yeah. No, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the Bob Boyce case. Now you were asking about vaccines. Now, initially, ISA Act only dealt with people who were complaining of something. They had to have a reason to come and see us. Um, I had the opportunity, and I was invited to go see a group of people in Stockton, California, and they had heard about what I was doing, and for some reason, they wanted me to scan their group. And so these are people who aren't complaining about anything. But what was interesting is that when we started scanning them, they weren't coming up positive with RF emission like everyone else. With the exception, they were mostly coming up in two areas, the right and left shoulder. And I'd ask them, "Did you
So
have
how
anything
are you
done?"
scanning them? Sorry if I missed this, but how are you
Okay.
scanning them when you
So,
go to these meetings?
great question. We use what's called a JM20 Pro. It's a general frequency detector. And what it allows us to do is to scan individuals, because it allows us to calibrate, um, to where you have to be within 2 inches of the emission. We live in a wireless society, so it's important that you have equipment that will allow you to do that. The same thing that Bob Boyce was using when he was in the Faraday cage. And the one went by his shoulder and pinged. So it's the same type of equipment. And we'll talk about our protocol and the types of scanning that we do, um, at least in the study, and what needs to happen if you believe this is something that's happening to you today. But in that group, it's the general considered the general population. They were coming up positive in the right and left shoulder, and they said the only thing they've ever had there was a shot, which was a vaccine. And the only deviation from that is, sometimes it would scan them around their hips, their backs, lower backs, or their knees, and they would come up positive there. And I would know nothing about their medical history. And then they would say they had a surgery in those areas. So that was pretty interesting. And so my thought process is this: I'm about to show you a declassified document that was done in declassified in 1994, and it's called New World Vistas. And was this was given to me, but it was obtained in 1995, and this was done by the United States Air Force greatest minds, and they wanted to talk about how the United States Air Force can maintain its superiority 50 years into the future. This is not the document. This is the same document, but I made a shorter version so I don't have to scroll through all these pages. I'll pull that up real quick for your audience. There it is. Okay. Same document, but I wanted to advise your listeners. This is where the mindset was of the United States Air Force uh, 30 years ago. And it had to be even greater than that because this was declassified 30 years ago. It says it appears likely that there are a number of physical agents that might actively but largely benignly interact or interfere with biological processes in an adversary in a manner which will provide the armed forces the tools to control these adversaries without extensive loss of life or property. These physical agents could include acoustic fields, optical fields, electromagnetic fields, combinations thereof. And then it says prior to the mid 21st century, there will be a virtual explosion of knowledge in the field of neuroscience. We will have achieved a clear understanding of how the human brain works, how it really controls the various functions of the body, and how it can be manipulated both positively and negatively. One can envision the development of electromagnetic energy sources, the output of which can be pulse, shape, and focus that can couple with the human body in a fashion that will allow one to prevent voluntary muscular movements. Remember the prisoners. Control emotions and thus actions, produce sleep, transmit suggestions, interfere with both short term and long term memory, produce an experience set, and delete the experience set. This will open the door for the development of some novel capabilities that can be used in armed conflict, in terrorist hostage situations, and in training. New weapons that offer the opportunity of control of an adversary without resorting to lethal solution or collateral casualties can be developed around this concept. This would offer significant improvements in the capabilities of our special operation forces. Initial experimentation should be focused on interaction of electromagnetic energy and neuromuscular junctions involved in the voluntary muscle control. Now, that sounds pretty outlandish, doesn't it? But it gets worse. It says it would also appear possible to create high fidelity speech in the human body, raising the possibility of covert suggestion and psychological direction. When a high power microwave pulse in the gigahertz range strikes the human body, a very small temperature perturbation occurs. This is associated with a sudden expansion of the slightly heated tissue. The expansion is fast enough to produce an acoustic wave. If a pulse stream is used, it should be possible to create an internal acoustic field in the 5 to 15 kilohertz range, which is audible. Thus, it may be possible to talk to selected adversaries in a fashion that would be most disturbing to them. In comparison to discussion in paragraphs above, the concept of imprinting and experience said is highly speculative, but nonetheless highly exciting. Modern electromagnetic scattering theory raises the prospect that the ultra short pulse scattering through the human brain can result in reflected signals that can be used to construct a reliable estimate of the degree of central nervous system arousal. This concept behind the remote EEG is to scatter off action potentials, ensembles, action potentials, and major central nervous system tracts. Assuming we will understand how our skills of imprinted and recall, it might be possible to take this concept one step further and duplicate the experiences set in another person. So they are talking about taking someone else's experiences and then putting in false memories into another human being. And remember, I talked about the Aaron Alexis and the Myron Mays, and the consideration that those who are highly suggestible. Now, think about having this type of technology. These people are, remember, are elite of the elite in our federal government are hearing
And
these
what is
sounds
that
24/7.
document from again exactly?
It's New World Vistas. It's a document created by the United States Air Force. It
And
was
how
it
did
was
you
declassified.
come across it?
Um, a, a colleague of mine had a FOIA request, and then this was given to me.
Okay. So it's been confirmed legitimate. How has it been confirmed legitimate?
Well, you're right now on the screen. You can see the loan documentation. You can see the serial number, when it was approved for distribution, and the entire document you have in the folder. But it's all confirmed and legitimate.
Interesting.
So,
So, so what's your goal now?
so what my goal has always been this. I can attest that both here in the United States, well, let's put it this way: Colonel Edgarin testified in Congress that this phenomenon is happening on every continent with one exception, and that's Antarctica. So this is currently a worldwide campaign. Now, is it one perpetrator? My suspicion is probably not. I know the United States has this capability, Russia has the capability, and China. So the three superpowers definitely have the capability of doing this. So there was an article released in the past. It was called the Politico, and President Putin was interviewed in it, and he said the next superpower to rule the world will be the one who masters psychotropic weapons. And so what I think we're experiencing here and it just is just my speculation and my feeling, is that this is an arms race, and this is why we're seeing so many cases globally.
So, do you think it's outside countries behind putting these alleged implants in like Americans? Would it be Russia doing it, or is it, according to your research, like us doing
Yeah,
it to ourselves?
that's a very good observation, because our federal government says there was no indication that this was being done by a foreign adversary. But Colonel Egren and the other two witnesses that gave testimony there uh, would say otherwise. Colonel Egren believed it was the Russians that were doing this to us, but we have to ask ourselves, how are these implants getting into people? Who's putting them in there? And some of these people have never left our country. So the only way that you can get them is through an injection or some type of ingestion. So that would say to me that we are once again experimenting on our own citizens. And the United States is not a stranger to this. The Tuskegee experiments, where they inflicted African American males with syphilis and let it proliferate just to see what it would do, it killed people. Ewan Cameron, the Canadian psychiatrist who was doing experiments trying to erase people's minds, and they reimplant new memories in them. He would give them drugs and give them make them sleep for long periods of time, months. And then they would put this helmet on them. And in the helmet was a tape recorder that would say themes over and over and over again. He would use what's called the law of repetition, which is used in hypnosis. Now, think about that. That was psychic driving in its infancy. But today, according to Colonel Egren, our best of the best are hearing this 365 days a year, 24/7. So now what this is, they've taken Ewan Cameron's concept of psychic driving and now put it on steroids. And this is what we're facing today. You had asked, you know, what types of equipment and what type of testing procedures we do. We had a protocol. First, we would do the preliminary scan with the JM20 Pro. And the reason we did that because it allowed us to scan lots of people at once. And then if they came up positive in a preliminary scan, we would ask them, well, see if you can get some radiographic imagery within that area that you're coming up positive in. Get a toxicology report where they would test for high levels of metals. The reason that's important is because the next scan that you would need to get what is called a nonlinear junction scan. So there's two type of implants. There's an implant that's on, which is active all the time. And then there are passive ones. They have to have a signal sent to them in order to activate them. So what a nonlinear junction scan does, it scans for both passive and active implants. It'll send a signal in to test if there's any ferrous material, any metal material. And if it finds it, it'll receive an echo, and then it'll send a second signal to activate that implant, turn it on. And then the third signal will detect a frequency and the location of where that is on your person. And so that is the process that we use. Now, why does it need to be done that way? Because now, um, if any of these nano size implants are in you, you're not going to see them on a traditional X-ray or an MRI scan. You have to go outside the medical community because they aren't taught about this. This is fairly new. Um, and so Colonel Egren, his complaint and his fight for the federal employees that he represents was that the Department of Homeland Security has now recognized that this AHI phenomenon or domestic Havana syndrome exists. And they have all these millions of dollars set aside, but none of these employees are able to go to the VA and get any help because there's no code for the Havana syndrome. So the money's just sitting there, and these people are just being led to continue to suffer through this. It destroys them. I've seen judges, I've seen attorneys, I've seen doctors, see white collar workers, I've seen blue collar workers. You run the gamut. And I've seen doctors lose their businesses because they don't understand. They go to traditional medicine, they get labeled with some type of psychoses or mental disorder or schizophrenia, and they lose their entire practices. They're not allowed to touch anyone. So this is what's happening, and this is our fight with the Mind Nexus project that we're doing.
For the implants you've shown that have been removed, how were those implants removed?
They were surgically removed based on
Okay.
on the testing that we've done. Yeah. So we
So
were able
they
to
were
locate them.
discovered through your testing, and then you take the person to a doctor, they take them out, then you find these
Well,
devices.
we have specialized surgeons and doctors that will remove these because your general surgeon, who knows nothing about the Havana Syndrome or AHIs, is not going to know what to do. I can guarantee you, they're going to send you to psychiatry, the mental health industry. So this is why we've created the Mind Nexus. It's an environment in where um, we brainstormed this concept where we can bring a plethora of experts in specific fields and then teach the general population, look, this is reality, this is what's happening. We have cases that we can show you. We have proof, so that you can begin to be educated, because education is the number one defense against this. um, Imagine you're a very religious person and you start hearing a voice that pretends to be God, and you want to manipulate that person. Very easily done with this technology. This is why it's important to educate the population um, about this. Now, if you're highly suggestible, the nice thing is through hypnotherapy, you can swing the pendulum of suggestibility to a somewhat normal range. Instead of being 95 to 100% suggestible, we get you down to 60 to 70%, utilizing hypnotherapy. We use um, techniques that allow them to use critical thinking whenever they're having to make a decision, and some other affirmations. Your suggestibility is really uh, predicted by the how you were raised, depending on whether you had a strict or loving mother, strict or loving father, an abusive environment. All these things come into play, and there's a way to test for it.
Now, you mentioned earlier the law of repetitiveness. I'm just curious what that is as somebody that hypnotizes themselves for fun from time to time. How could I use this law of repetitiveness to my benefit?
Yeah. Well, I always say, um, I'm writing a book right now. It's done. We're in the editing phase. It's called Undue Influence: Turning Your Suggestibility into a Superpower. Remember, I said being educated, acknowledging that this exists in the first place, and being aware of it is the first step to defend yourself. Because then you can start to use the law of repetition, um, and self hypnosis. I always encourage everyone, go see a professional like myself, um, or someone in your region that can help guide you initially on how to swing that pendulum over. Now, all the law of repetition is that you hear it enough times, and then it'll eventually get past your critical thinking factors and into your subconscious, and eventually get embedded in there. That's the concept of it. But we see it in media every day. We see it on all of our news networks every day. Um, they use this fear factor thing because it keeps you in an altered state. Fear is an altered state. Fear makes you highly suggestible. Um, we are human beings. We are in and out of different states throughout the day, and so they are aware of this and they use this as a mechanism. Now, the new World Vistas document that I've given you, um, you have to think about that. That was pretty wild stuff back then to even think that. But now that we're pulling these implants out of people, and all of the objective data that we now have of how many victims there is, not only here in the United States and throughout the world and in Canada, this is something that we need to make sure that everyone is awoke for, because there are some serious decisions to be made here. Um, we are now being treated like cattle. We're not being treated like humans, because I don't believe anyone would ever consent to this once they understand. And you've seen that leaked document that was being done to the prisoners. Um, just think about what they can do to the general population. This is a big social engineering project in the works, and it's full steam ahead right now. And so it's important that we don't allow this divide and conquer mentality to happen, because when society wakes up and becomes unified, that's when we get our power back.
Do you think some of these alleged alien implants that we've seen people discuss over the years and put out in books are actually covert operation implants and not actually these people that believe they've had UFO experiences? Maybe these implants in them have convinced them that they're UFO experience, perhaps.
Yeah, well, the UFO experience is an interesting phenomenon. When it comes to abductions and having these physical implants in you, I strongly feel, in my opinion, that these are all going to be human intervention. Okay. Now, are all experiences going to be human intervention? The jury's still out. But if you recall, after everything that I've shown you, you can imprint false memories in people with this. So, what needs to happen is we need to rule out that that's not what's happening in those cases. And when we rule that out, then we can move on to the next level. Is this alien in nature? Um, and that's my feeling on it. Does uh, the UFO phenomenon exist? I strongly think it does, but I think it's more on an interdimensional basis. If you look at the work of Richard Hutchinson, I believe, is Canadian, self-taught, he was utilizing the electromagnetic pulsed energy to manipulate matter, and you could literally levitate a glass of water out of the glass. Ice cream would float. He would take cannonballs and he would aim these pulses at it, and it would turn it into an exotic metal. Now they were going to air a demonstration about what he was doing on the History Channel, and they were filming it. And when they turned it all the way up, they started to see these angelic beings start to emerge. And then they turned it off immediately. And then for whatever reason, um, it was never shown. So I believe, based on what he was working on, that there is an interdimensional aspect out there. And because if you think about this, if you had to travel thousands of light years or hundreds of light years away to other worlds, it doesn't make sense, particularly for human travel. But if you can figure out how to open up portals and interdimensional travel, that would make more sense. And I think the science and the physics is going to prove that for us.
And there's also been a Harvard paper come out recently with the theory of crypto terrestrials, that they're actually here somewhere and we're just maybe not aware of them.
I guess anything's possible, but the jury's still out, and when that evidence comes forward, then we can say, yeah, well, that was our suspicion all the time, or yay or nay, it exists or it doesn't exist.
So pretty much, if you suspect you have one of these, due to what would be the symptoms that someone would experience?
Right. So, and I have to use a word of caution here. If you're experiencing something and you think it's a medical disease process, then you most definitely want to see a medical professional. Okay. Now, if you think that this phenomenon is happening to you, which is not initially a disease process, but can cause disease processes, then you're going to have to go outside of our medical, traditional medical communities, and you're going to have to find someone who, like us, who does radio frequency testing, and we have other experts that we always refer to, like for the nonlinear junction scans. We want to make sure they have certain credentials, so that if it ever has to go to the medical professions, and they want supporting documentation of what you suspect, you're going to need that. And then if there's any court case, and there are court cases moving through right now, lawsuits, um, uh, that will need these tests in order to prove your case.
And where are you based?
I'm based in Reno, Nevada. My Nexus team, we have Desiree Foley, who is in Arizona, and then we have Mike Grady, who is your big fan. He's out in New York. Go, Mike. And you can contact any of us at mynexuslive.com. We are having an event, if in-person event, where we're going to demonstrate some of these processes live in front of the audience. It's in Tucson, Arizona at the Marriott Hotel there. Starts September 27th, goes through the 29th. The first 2 nights, there's going to be a catered dinner. You'll get to engage with all of the speakers, and the speakers we're going to have there is just a rock star lineup. It's John D'Souza, the original X-Man. His diaries were the impetus for the X-Files. Carrie Cassidy of Project Camelot. Dr. John Hall, who I mentioned earlier. Dr. Alex Bloom. He's a psychiatrist who will also be speaking there on topics about awakening. We have Ben Chastain, who has a huge following. Aaron Kuhn, Tyler Koala from the Journey to Truth podcast. Mikhail Mael, who's a spiritualist. Jen and Brian Berryhill, who are also spiritualists. So we've got a plethora of people. Oh, and Dr. Rima LeBeau, who used to be married to General Stubblebine, will be there, and I myself will be there. But it's a 3-day event. Come out. If for those who are watching your show, if you use a special code MNexus, you get $50 off the 3-day event. If you can't attend, no worries. We do have the streaming access, and that'll allow you all 3 days plus a year access to the event, that you can learn from what we're teaching everyone and all of the evidence that we're exposing.
And what's the website if they want to know more information?
Mind, MIND, Nexus, NUXUS, live.com. And also, if you're curious about your suggestibility, there's a free suggestibility test. You just look in the header of the website, click on suggestibility test, and then you can test for your suggestibility. And if you're highly suggestible, it'll alert us, and then we'll reach out to you, ask you some further questions.
But you could make yourself more suggestible if you're, let's say, a person like me that likes to kind of put themselves in trances, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that you have an implant.
No, no. By human nature, let's take the technology away. 30% of the general population is highly suggestible. And and that's normal. We transition in and out of states, as I mentioned. And just because you do self hypnosis, that can be a healthy thing, because usually you're doing the repetition because you want to have a certain outcome, or you have a certain goal, and those are all uh, healthy, good, normal behaviors to do, as long as you're educated on how to do it correctly. So I would always recommend, if you're going to enter into something like that, there's plenty of literature on self hypnosis. There's plenty of literature on hypnosis. If you want to dabble in it yourself, that's how I started. And if you want to take it more seriously and become professionally certified, there are great schools out there. I'm a big fan of HMI down in Calabasas, California. Dr. Kappas was one of the grandfathers in really teaching you that everyone can be hypnotized. There used to be the mindset that only a certain percentage, that small 30%, but those were the easy people to hypnotize because they were highly suggestible. But Dr. Kappas had taught me, at least, that that's not the case. Everyone can be put in trance at some level, and there's a very methodical and a healthy way to do it.
I know that you've done all different types of hypnosis. You are not necessarily a UFO believer or an alien believer. I'm just curious what you think of these people that never knew they were abducted and then have these hypnosis sessions and then recall
Oh,
all of these.
regression and
Yeah, these
regression therapy.
regressions where they go into these alleged abductions. Do you think these are people that are actually creating this in their minds too, or have you had any
Um,
experience with anything like that?
well, I haven't had anyone. I have not done a regression on anyone who believes that they were abducted by aliens. I have done regressions where people, even most recently, was an interesting case. Usually, when you do a regression, people will express who they were in previous lives, and we can go back many, many lives as long as they can recall them under hypnosis or go into that state. Now, I recently had a regression where a person regressed into an entity, energetic entity is the only way I could describe it. And it was fascinating on what she was conveying, but she was regressed. It almost seemed like it was a transitional environment where there were all these energy beings. It was the first of its kind in its case. And the room when we were doing this regression was electrified. We had people walking in into the room and they could feel what was happening in the environment. So it was really interesting. So I'm looking forward to working with her again so that we can revisit what does this really mean. And we wanted to have some additional equipment in the room to measure heat changes, energy changes, and so forth. So um, we are definitely on the forefront of doing that.
You seem like a fairly scientific guy, but at the same time, you're talking about past life regressions, which a lot of people are going to not believe in past life regressions. What's your whole theory on life and death, and what happens after you pass away?
Okay. Well, I'm an experiencer. I passed away when I was 6 years old. I hemorrhaged after having a tonsillectomy, and my father was in tears in the hospital ER saying, "Please save my son." And I remember being on the operating table, and I can hear them saying, We're losing him. We're losing him." I can remember elevating to the corner of the operating room, watching them do compressions on me. Then everything went black, and then there was this white light, and I walked to the white light, and when I you're the first podcast that I've talked about this. Um, and when I walked to the white light, all I can explain as a 6-year-old child, and I ask everyone, who are the two most important people in a child's life at that age? It's mom and dad, because that's the only love they know. But when I entered into this light, it was that times infinity, the kind of love that a mom and dad has for a child times infinity. And a voice said to me, there was a male voice, and it says, "I'm sorry, it's not your time." And as this child, I didn't want to go back. I go, "No, I don't want to go back." And I was crying as this 6-year-old boy. And the voice said again, "I'm sorry, it's not your time." And I can remember falling, 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 having this falling feeling. And I hit the cold operating table. And they go, "Jesse, Jesse." I said, "We got him. We got him back." So I can say this because I'm an experiencer in it, that there's more to life that we know. And it's important that we keep an open mind, but it's also important that we use our critical thinking factors, that we use rationale. Um, we're only in the infancy of what we know. And as long as you keep an open mind and you're able to, as you get new data sets in, um, then you're able to reshape your belief systems. And it's important that we continue to do that. But ultimately, um, having that experience, I can say I'm not afraid of death. And I don't believe um, we die. And because of that experience, in some of these instances and these regressions, I completely believe what they're saying.
Interesting. Well, I appreciate your time and sharing this information with us for the fans to do their own research and maybe look into your website and get more information if they want to know more. And I'll let you close this off with whatever message you want to leave people with.
No, that my only message is I think that was the perfect closing to the question for this topic. And please visit the My Nexus Live event. Our goal is to make sure that we share truth, reality, and we're not about violence. We're about coming up with um, positive solutions to these very serious issues. And it's important that we unify. This divide and conquer mentality isn't going to work, hasn't worked for centuries. And that's what I'd like to leave.